If you look over here, I put it on the screen already. We're on the first wide line, the Ba'ilahu. So they're going to ask a question specifically about what? Because the Mishnah brought up quite a few cases, Shehiyah, Chazara. Those are both touched on by the Mishnah, and obviously a lot of details are left out, right? Presumably, hold like Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel allows for some sort of Chazara on Shabbos. Beis Shammai do not, and you could understand Beis Shammai's opinion because Shehiyah itself is already something you could do before Shabbos. The whole heter of Shehiyah. Left off with this. The whole heter of Shehiyah is that you're not doing it on Shabbos. You did it before Shabbos, but Chazara, suddenly you're messing with it now. You're allowed to put this pot down on a heat source before Shabbos. If it was removed from that heat source, the heter, not the heter, it doesn't matter. Who says you could put it back? So Beis Hillel are the ones who say you could put it back, but there's even more conditions. If Shehiyah itself was limited by Chazal, and called Chomer, the act of Chazara usually those are fancier, so sorry about that. So we're on the first red line here. It says this kira, assuming this device that they use to leave the food, you normally used it all week to cook, and now the food is going to remain on top of this kira on Shabbos. So the question was, in the case where Shehiyah was not allowed for whatever reason, it's too hot, he didn't blech it, he fired it up really well. Perhaps he could put something right next to it, take his pot of food that he wants to remain hot or keep hot or heat up somehow, and put it up against the wall of this kira. Yeah, this both stuff. So Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, right here. First line. So that was the question. They, the anonymous students, I guess. Mahu spoke, but we put the food up against it. Tocha v'gaba aser. I assume that putting this food into the kira or on top of the kira, that's already not permitted for whatever reason. And always spoke, but shaper dummy. Smicha isn't going to make it as hot as anything. It's the difference. Has anybody ever done an active smicha? The difference between putting food in the oven and putting food next to the oven. It's not going to have the same effect. So it should be well with this smicha, or perhaps keep it hot. The Rambam would say keep it hot. Okay, keep the food hot because he doesn't, like you said. He says in two places you're really not allowed to heat up food on Shabbat. It's told us eight. This eight. So the Rambam says if you want hot food on Shabbos, you have to do the proper act of Shehiyah or a proper act of Chazara while it's still hot. Rambam didn't have a refrigerator. We are fortunate that we can prepare all of our food beforehand, and we just put the food on some other. We prepare all garbage there, but even food straight out of the refrigerator. There are other Rishonim who already said, for example, unlike let's say the common psach, that any liquid once, if it's a type of liquid that's meant to be eaten hot, once it has lost its heat, it's as though it's not levushal anymore, and making it hot once again is a new act of bishul. For example, chicken soup. So heating up soup on Shabbos, of course, to everybody would be a prohibition. But as you know, there are Rishonim who said, in Afinami, you're allowed to recook chicken soup even on Shabbos. So you can take a soup. I think some Yemenites hold like this, even though it's against the Rambam. They take a soup out of the fridge on Shabbos, chicken soup, and stick it on a blech directly. And even with the blech is already on, not even one with the primer. We don't hold that way. But I'm just saying the Rambam is much more machmir, but he managed to have hot food on Shabbos. So this is the question. The question is smicha. Okay, they're treating the kira as an act of smicha because they already they basically lost their chance to do shehiyah properly. So they want it at least to be a little bit warmer or stay warm at least to this extent. And don't forget, these things could have been hot. So he says, the Shapir Dami, Dilma Loshna, maybe there is no difference. Just like putting this food on top of the kira or within the kira where the coals are, that's prohibited. So too, the speak would be prohibited. And here's a proposal, Tashma. We'll propose an answer. We have no notes here. Shtei kirot hamati mot. You have two kiras, a twin kira. Can we say klipach is two kiras basically? But putting the food on top of this kira would be prohibited. Yeah.
Why would it be prohibited?
Because there are many cases where shahia is prohibited. Maybe from Tuma.
Because we're afraid that you're going to show people.
Yeah, it's one of those cases like we have in the chart that it's prohibited.
That we can understand why possibly the deal.
Yeah,
We're, but we know, I'm not putting it on inside.
yeah.
What is the happen if it's a destruction?
Because it's not derech. You're already not going to stoke it. And it's the havamina should be usher is that it is just like you're using the kira. The kira is your heat source. So you didn't put your food on top of the kira in the kira. You put it next to the kira. You still want the kira to be nice and hot. Perhaps the smicha was the backup. This kira only has room for one big pot, but today it's a special Shabbos. You have an offer. You have two pots. What are you going to do? Build another kira before Shabbos? So one pot doesn't need to be so super hot. So that will be the smicha pot. The other one will be shehiyah. So the smicha was used. Yeah. They said shloshna smicha, just like shehiyah al gaba or toka, or perhaps smicha should have, because it's a lesser act, it should be permissible. It's not the derech. That's what the Gemara's proposal is. So now we're going to try to see a proof. And the proof is the case of 2 kirot mat imot. Now, my question was kirot mat imot. If you build 2 kiros, let's say a kira that has room for 2 kederas on top, a 2-hole kira, we already said it's called a what? A kupach. In this case, a kupach is there's one compartment under the bottom, one section of coals. This kirot mat imot means 2 sections for the coals. They just happen to have maybe even a wall, a space between them where there's actual air passing through. Yeah. No, but there's a space between them, right? Yeah. So there's a kira over there. This is the space in between them. Our hero says there's ways for air to get through. Yeah. In between. Yeah. No, in between the 2 kiras, the walls of the kira. From one kira to another. One kira has fire in it, and the other kira doesn't. And you would say, well, kira in one, if they had a really shared wall, their mom is made out of the same material, so the fire in one is also heating up the other. But if there's some avira, like we're jumping to the answer already, the space, right? There's going to be some airspace in between. There has to be something in between that makes them separate. If there was none of that space between, you'd have a kupach, I think. Okay. By the way, this is such a perfect example in the picture. They don't really have a lot of pictures they could use. I know because I saw when they were doing the Talmud, for example, the picture they have of the shears they used for shearing the sheep. So they just took the one that everybody could find to do a simple Google search, the Wikipedia Commons one. Okay, that's the pictures they use. It's not like they have tons of these things lying around. Okay, so that's the question. Kirot matimot. And the answer is achat rufok tuma, achat seina rufok tuma. One is rufok tuma. We said basically the halachic equivalent of blech. That one has a proper blech on it, and the other one doesn't. Mashin al gabe rufok tuma. We can do shehiyah. We leave the food on the one that's rufok tuma, the one with the proper blech. Raf al gav because salikle havla meidach. And even though heat is coming out of the other one, fettered heat. The other one is not rufok tuma. The other one doesn't have a blech, so its heat is, I guess, normal heat. Not you find that nice stoked coals. The coals aren't covered or swept out, so it's going to generate heat. So smicha on this blech, on a non-blech kira, should be permissible on the Sabbath. Non-blech kira. Why? Yeah. So, and by the way, this line over here of Apol Gav because Salik Le Havla Meidach, that's not the Brisa form. We were talking Brisa. Up until now we have Hebrew. And suddenly it says Apol Gav this because Salik Havla Meidach, even though heat is coming out of the other one. Is there Rashi here? Is it important Rashi? Let's just check. No. Let's see what Rashi said here. Kedera Eitzel Dofen Akira below Grupa. Okay. What did Rashi says the question was, put your Kedera next to the wall of a kira that has not been swept out properly. So this kira is blazing. Okay. So you would have thought, well, I can't do shehiyah on this blazing kira, but maybe I can do stifa. Okay. Shakira Bitalteleti, Moshizu Tal Gabi Karka. Remember, the Kira is Bitaltelet. I'm a little bit suspect about that picture also in the Steindals. It looks like that thing was a little bit stuck in the ground. The Rashi says a Kira, you should be able to pick it up, okay? And you move it around wherever you want, like I guess electric stove like we have nowadays. So, like I said, smicha on this non-blech Kira should be permissible according to this argument, even though it's blazing, okay? You put your food in the case of the Gemara just brought. The food is sitting on a kira that's been properly black. But right next to it is this unblack kira that's giving off a lot of heat. And you're right, Mom, it's right next to it. Your food is right next to it. You would say, wait a minute, being that even though your food is sitting on a proper black kira, it's also right next to something that's also giving it a lot more heat, unchecked heat, and doesn't seem to be a problem. That is the proposal, and now we're going to knock it down with your permission. The Ma Dover Dome, I guess this would be putting your cholent on the classic blech we used to have back in the States, piece of metal on the stove, the fire is on low, but right next to the stove is yet another stove. Who has two stoves right next to each other? And that other stove is just blasting, and the fire is on high, whatever it is. So that's also making a lot of heat. But the way our stoves are built is they just make hot go up. It thinks it's on the surface. It's not like it has a wall to it. It has mamushes, so you could put something next to the stove and get hot from it. This would be the equivalent, I guess, putting something next to the radiator. But even the radiator, the heat is on top. An AGA stove? Okay. Oh, you put it something next to it. Okay. Is that where they use to make the crumpets for the tea? No. Okay. Oh. Okay. Well, I haven't had the privilege of experiencing this. Okay. So this is going to be knocked down. What? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Nowadays, even with home ovens, like I said, we have built-in ovens. No one's putting something next to the oven reasonably trying to heat it up because it's usually insulated on the sides, or there's wooden panels on the sides. It's basically irrelevant today doing anything like this. So I guess you go to. Okay. Yeah, but already putting something on top of, let's say, a pot of food, a kugel on top of the pot. So already the pot's temperature, we said, is highly limited. When you're cooking foodstuffs in the pot on the stove, it doesn't go much above 100 degrees Celsius because of its water content. Whereas if you're talking about this kira with coals inside blaring, so it achieves much higher temperatures. It basically sometimes putting something on top of that is like putting something directly on fire itself. So this is the question. This proposal is going to be knocked down by the next line of the Gemara where it says, Dilma Shane Hatam. No, maybe that's not. So the case that you brought is not similar to the case about which you anonymous ones are questioning, because the Kavan de Midalya Shlita Shalit Be Avira. Because of the weak spot in the middle, the air gets in between. Rashi says, Hakdera al Gabe Hakira. Okay, the Midalya Hakdera al Gabe Hakira. There's some air in between there that's intervening. So, well, what is it? It's not really there. If your pot is directly on the fire, right? Is directly on a kira roofing tuba, and the havla that's coming out of the other kira that's not blech isn't directly there. There's a kedera al gabe kira is not. There's some intervening air. There's some space there. So the havla. What's havla, by the way? Havla is the what? Hot air. Hot air. The heat, the way for the heat to pass. In this case, that was brought as the proof. The smicha is not so perfect. It's not. We would have said, let's say the other side of the argument. The argument to not allow such a case is that there's this kira right next door to the one we're using that's unblecked and generating all this heat. So it should perhaps disallow what we're trying to do. The answer is we don't pay attention to this other kira that's blaring because it's already mafsik. There is a hefsik between it and the kira we're actually using. So no proof can be brought from this particular case. Yeah. Oh, you don't like the shot there? No. They wanted to bring a proof to this kira mat'ima. The kira mat'ima case that is brought here doesn't exactly prove what they were trying to prove it does.
I have a thought
Yeah.
on the group of people,
Yeah.
which is perfectly okay. And now next to that, I have another oven,
Mhm.
green oven, that's producing a lot of heat.
Yeah.
And nevertheless, even though I'm getting more heat, I don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
And therefore, I have a pot
Stom.
outside. Then I don't have to worry about that, the sneaker is okay.
Yeah.
That's what's wrong with it.
So that would be good. But in this case, we're not even the kira mat'ima. He says shiny there. The cave in the Vidalia Shalit Avira. You want to do mamish smicha. You were trying to take this pot and put it up against the kira that's blaring. But the case that you brought to prove it is a case where we're not necessarily considering that this unblecht kira is really contributing so much heat to the kira we are using. I'll say it looks like this. If I could use the standards as a muscle. We're trying to say this is, let's say, you hot kira over here. Oh, okay, fine. So I'll do it over here. This stender is the really hot kira where my computer is sitting. It's the really hot one, unblecht, and this chair is the blessed one. So we said really hot. I know I can't put something on top of it like my Gemara, but maybe I could put, assuming the Gemara is a kugel, so I'll put the Gemara up against it. Right now it's going to get hot. Maybe it's permissible. Maybe it's permissible. And the case they brought is this. This is the blech kira. The Gemara is on top of this. They're saying, well, the Gemara is almost like samach to it. It's getting hot from this other kira. No problem. Said, yeah, of course there's no problem in this particular case because you didn't go like that. There's a space over here. You know, it's the Gemara is over here relative to this kira, not up against its wall. So you need a better case. If you wanted to prove the heter, you need a case that is more, that is closer to the case that you're looking for. And in this case, it's at least this line of Gemara rejects that. Don't worry, we're not done. There's more Shtaku V'Tarya ahead of us. So yeah, even look, back in the day, there were machlokas in between great rabbis and different minhagim. Yes, sir.
We have to be cleaning here. We have to be out by 12. We clean here every
good.
Wednesday. We have to get it done. If we don't do it, it'll be good. It's by 11?
Yeah, please. Thank you. Okay, good. Okay, whatever. We still have to learn. Remember, because all said they're going to ask you. Okay, Tashma. How about a different proof to this question, or one way or another? It says Dama Rav Safra, Amar Rav Pia. We're over here on this line. What? Kitama v'nis labita. A person had a kira, root from tuma. Means kitama means he sprinkled the ashes on to put on his blech, but somehow or other the wind is blown and you see the coals have stoked themselves. God has stoked the coals. So now it's a lot hotter than it's supposed to be according to what Chazal wanted. Somchim umikayim aleha. Oh, good. It says it right there. Somchim la umikayim aleha. The shahiyah, apparently mikayim aleha is similar to shahiyah. You can still put food on this left before Shabbos and put food up against it. And you can take the food off this kira that's ketuma. Doesn't say ketuma, but ketuma is the same din. And you could do chazar on it. And notice there's funny enough, there's none of these marks from the Ein Mishpat on this particular teaching. We possibly like it, so it's not brought by poskim. So it's gonna be questionable. Yeah. It says there's no footnotes here. There's no little aleph, bet, gimel, daled. Normally, the Ein Mishpat makes a note for you where Rambam or the Shulchan Aruch or the Torah rules, and none of this brisa, Sorry, the Amar Rav Safra, Amar Rav Chia. This isn't even a brisa. It's Rav. This is a Amoraic teaching, even though it's in Hebrew. It's not quoted, so it might not be exactly formulated halacha like we have in some other Mishnayos. Okay, just to know. So that's usually a clue for those of us who are not as adept at posting ourselves. We can look what others have posted. So it says here either way. If you had this kira that's ketama, that's been sprinkled, but we're talking about a kira that's not ketuma. So you're saying smicha on a blech that's not. He says here shmamina lemismochnami kitama in lo kitama lo. What allowed the shehiyah or the kiyum and the smicha at this particular kira was the fact that kitama, he had sprinkled its coals with ashes. He has a layer of ashes on this. It's properly blessed, implying that the smicha was only permitted because it was properly blessed, meaning that if it is not properly blessed, no smicha. So that seems to be the proof. Or as I wrote here, smicha should only be allowed if it was properly blessed. This seems to be a good proof to one of the proposed, this dilemma. It's either this way or that way. And the answer is smicha is only allowed on a kira that's ketuma, and I guess also grupa, because grupa is the same din as ketuma. Fine enough. The Gemara is going to challenge this one and say that the language is lav dafka. What is it, lav dafka? Let's read it. Utameh, you who proposed this proof. Notinlimi mena, pikatani, kitama'in, lo kitmalo. Remember, this teaching ends with, and he could also take food off of this kira on Shabbos. He could take food off this kira on Shabbos, and we had said that it's dafka because the food, this kira had been ketuma, it had been black. But we have a rule that even if something had been shehiyad, for lack of a better word, something had been left on the fire source or the heat source before Shabbos, even if it had been done wrongly, we know that he might not be able to eat that food, but he can always take that food off of the heat source. You have food that's sitting, a cholent that had been put on some sort of heat source. Let's say someone actually left the cholent directly on the stovetop before Shabbos, which he shouldn't have done, basically according to our rules. He might not be able to eat that cholent on Shabbos. There's a lot of rules which we're going to see regarding that, how long he has to wait, who can eat it exactly. Those are all questions. But what we all agree on is he can remove that cholent from the stove. That's not a malach in any way. Yet this teaching seems to imply that the netila, removing this food from this particular type of kira, is only permissible because the kira has been blessed. I would have said the opposite, by the way. If a kira is blessed, leave the food on. But if you've left the food without some sort of some blech or ketuma in this case, so to take the food off, so you're not going to cause an isser to happen on Shabbos. Don't let the isser happen. Okay, so that's really not going to part. Ella, it must be Tana, this teaching. Nor mentioned Natila, not because Natila is dafka on this type of kira, but because the chazara is allowed by the ketuma. Okay, the machzirin meant that we can only have, remember, the Tanaya Chazar are tighter than Tanaya Shehiyah. Shehiyah is allowed in certain cases. Chazara is allowed in even less cases. Not all Shehiyah is permissible, and even less Chazara is permissible. So the fact that mentioned Notli Mimeno Machzirin law connects the Netila with the Chazara or the Hachzara. And in this case, we can't just say that Netila is limited to the Ketuma case. And the reason smicha was mentioned at the beginning is because we're also going to mention shehiyah. Shehiyah does need the ketuma aspect, but the smicha might not need it. The smicha is just mentioned agav the kiyum. Or as I wrote here, kiyum as a prerequisite blessing. You have to do the kiyum for that. But perhaps smicha does not. And smicha is mentioned here, where it appears to have a prerequisite because of its association with kiyum. That's how we'd say it in Art Scroll English. Although I don't know what Art Scroll actually wrote in this case because I didn't look at Art Scroll. And there you go. So it's sort of, this proof, once again, is inconclusive. It seemed to mention smicha explicitly, but now from, I guess it's 12th grade reading level, it seems that the smicha is lav dafka and is only there by association, just like the netila is only there by association. And this breakup is going to be rejected by apparently the voice that had first offered this proposal, this teaching. Hachi hashta. Hold on 1 second. Hachi hashta means how now. Literally it means how now. Hachi is how, and hashta is now. So how now? Hasam no linu machzirim b'chad makomhu. You know that netila and chazara are basically opposite actions. They're done at one place. You pick up the pot, that's netila. Chazara is put it back in the same place. Netila and chazara chad makomhu. It's basically from a thermodynamic standpoint, it's just the same operation in reverse, done at the same place, same object, same place. But that relationship doesn't exist between the smicha and shehiyah. It says Tana note the mishu machzir, and that's why it had to mention netila, because we're going to mention chazara. You're going to put it back. You have to put it back. Where do you get it from? You took it off of it. However, elahacha, the way I tried to first enunciate this proof. So smicha is, the way I understand it, is putting something against the kira over here. See, against the stender on the right over here. But shehiyah is the act of putting it on top. By the way, that doesn't seem like such a solid proof. So we're going to leave it here that this is inconclusive. How do I know it's inconclusive? Because I wouldn't know. I would be scratching my head because it seems that the one who offered the proof gets the last line, gets the last word. However, the voice of the Gemara continues, my away ale. Okay? What eventually came of this? It seems like this argument went on for a while, but there was no conclusion, at least no conclusion of which we were aware. So the Gemara asks, what was the conclusion? Tashma. Here's perhaps a teaching that will give us a conclusion. Kira shehi sikua begefed uveitzim somtimla. Oh, it seems pretty clear. Kira, that was fired with gefet and eitzim somtimla. That's normal forms of fuel. It's not kashing devava, the weaker forms that'll burn out quickly. Gefet, we said, was peat, although it's not common, and wood is proper wood. Although you have to also thank God we don't burn wood anymore in the house. What's the problem with, let's say, cooking with wood or heating the house with wood or using wood fire all the time? Well, yeah, smoke. Now, we only experience this once a year, but can you imagine? It used to be that everybody was basically a smoker in their house. You know, you're cooking with real fire in the house. You didn't ventilate it properly. And even if you did, you had smoke. Nowadays, thank God, our ovens, our stoves burn. Hold on, someone's entering. Our stoves burn a natural gas that does not produce soot or other chemicals in the air. It just makes carbon dioxide and water vapor. And that's pretty good. You know, and as long as you have oxygen in the room, you could go, and even in the winter, you're not worried that you're going to be killing yourself. Although there are some people who've used the stove too much and really sealed up the windows good, and then they ran out of oxygen. So don't do that. But thank God, that's a rare occurrence. The damage by burning wood in the house is a lot worse. Okay, so here's the proposal. Hirashi Sukua the Gefetiv, it seems so kimo. Vein Mekaymin Elikin group of tuma. That seems pretty clear. Shehiyah has a condition. You need to do group of tuma. But the smicha aspect, sticking something against the kira, seems to be pretty much okay, even if it was fired properly. Okay, it seems to answer the question. Yechalim she'amamu o shenatan ladne oret shel pispan daka harehu kik tuma. And if you were to heat up one of these kiras with coals that have already died down, so you don't see visible fire in it, you'll have to stoke them and get the coals working, or you actually cover them with oret of pishpan, which is the refuse of the flax plant, the part that they don't use for the fibers to make the clothing. So that's like tuma, like you sprinkled it with ashes. And this seems to be pretty much the case. And that's why, by the way, in poskim like this, you'll see there's a note, a gimel next to the word kira and a dal next to kafalim. That's what I was referring to. That means the Ein Mishpat says, oh, you could find those halachas in, for example, the Torah and Beis Yosef. The Ramah brings it specifically, and the other one, the Rambam mentions, as does the Shulchan Aruch. So those are typical halachic answers. So the first proposals aren't brought as halacha, but this last one is. So if you want, yes, I guess if you had a kira that was unblack, you could still put something next to the kira. Like we said, it seems, according to many, they could just put it up against it with hakila and heat it up on Shabbos. Like I said, the Rambam would say in order to preserve the heat of something that's already cooked, but not to heat something up. And if you want to heat something up according to the Rambam, I guess use solar heat. Let's continue after these two. Oh, there's no two dots. I put a mark here. It looks like two dots. What does Rav Yitzchak say? He's going to bring up a different, a related but different topic. Rav Yitzchak Bar Nachman, Bar Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Nachmani, Amar Rav Ushaya, Kitama v'huvara. Let's say a person treated his kira properly. He wants to. He's been learning Perek Kira at the Sinai Kollel, and he wants to implement the Shabbos halachas properly. So he is going to sprinkle ashes on the layer of coals that is in his kira, so that he could leave some food there before Shabbos to eat nice and hot on Shabbos. And what happened? He had been told that he sprinkles these ashes on the coals is to remind himself not to stoke the coals, because stoking the coals and getting them hotter and burning more, that would be problematic on Shabbos. That's the act of burning, and also maybe even lead to the act of cooking on Shabbos, two malachos. But now he sees that even though he sprinkled some ashes on these coals, the wind has blown, and it suddenly flared up, which is, I guess, good for him, but still, he didn't want that to happen. So this teaching says, according to Rabbi Shaya, by the way, this is also Amoraim. This is not a Tanaic teaching, even though it's in Hebrew. Mashin alech amin shehu pamu kol tzarkan v'tavshil shebishel kol tzarko. You know what you can put on top of this before Shabbos? These coals that have, I guess, somehow they've been agitated, they're nice hot. So you could put water that's been fully boiled. Kol tzarko means the water is still sufficiently hot. Might not be really boiled, but it's hot enough to be hot for what people need hot water for. And a tavshil that's fully cooked. Now, the problem is, we know that there's two fully cooked types of tavshilin. What are the two fully cooked types of tavshilin? There's what I call steak and cholent. Steak is mitztamek viralo. You just keep cooking that steak. You want it to shrivel up nice and good. You're ruining it. Might even make it that you can't chew it. But we've perfected the act of cholent, which also has meat inside, and that's mitztamek v'yafalo. You leave a cholent on cooking longer, it actually seems to get better. So this teaching does not make a distinction between the two. And then why is that good for us? Because we're more limited to how much shehiyah we could do on something that's mitztamek v'yafalo, a cholent. It makes sense that a person would be more limited by what the sages allowed, or the sages would allow less with something that improves through more cooking. Something that will not improve through more cooking. We're not worried if it's come to stoke the coals. But this teaching seems to make no distinction, meaning that it has a major leniency. I could just put this tamek v'yafalo food on this kira that he sprinkled the ashes, but anyway, he sprinkled the ashes on top, but the coals flared up. I'm going to go into the next page for those keeping track at home. Just wait 1 second while we put it up there. So yeah, that's actually that's going to be the Gemara's next proposal. Is that what it's trying to teach? That Shma Mina, this should teach us what? Mitztamek v'yafalo mutar. I could do shehiyah. I could leave this mitztamek v'yafalo cholent on the blecht kira on Shabbos, even though the kira has fired up itself. I sprinkled the coals, but it fired up. You dispute what I say? No? It sounds clear? Good. So that's the proposal. Because no distinction was made necessarily. Like Rashi says, mitztamek, misma'it the kivetz. Okay? It becomes less, and also it contracts. And he gives the French word for it. I don't know French, so I'm not going to try to pronounce it. And it says, Lashon Shadayim Tzomakim. It's related to this word of, in the Klala of Hosea. He talks about part of what's going to happen in Kurban times. There's shriveled breasts, which is usually a muscle for inability to sustain, for that which should sustain, to sustain. Kimo She'ato Omer B'Lashon Tzivui Nitztava. You can take from Lashon Tzivui Nitztava. It doesn't mean Lashon Tzivui with the Binyan Tzivui. Rashi means from the Shoresh Sadi Vav Hey, where we get the word mitzvah and mitzvot. So you could have a nitpa'el form. Okay? What? A nitpa'el. Nitztava is not a hitpa'el. A nitpa'el. It's like a nifal and a hitpa'el. Rashi says nitztava. L'shon tzivui from the shoresh sadi vav. This shoresh from tzivui with the shoresh sadi vav silent hey you could get a hitpael, ulashon tzedek nitztadok. You were asking, wait a second, Rashi's answering a very important question, by the way, which people try to ignore, but Rabbi Dulitz used to make sure we memorize this rule. You guys remember Rabbi Dulitz. So Rabbi Dulitz always said that in a hitpael, you add a taf and a hey or a mem, or a letter of etan, aleph taf yud, nun, depending on the tense. So the taf is always there. In the present tense, there is a mem before the taf. Mitpalel, mitpalelim, mitpalelot, mitpalelet. Okay? We have from the shoresh pei lamed lamed. In the past tense, that mem becomes a hey. Hitpalel, hitpalela, hitpalalti. In the future tense, you put an aleph yud taf or nun before that taf. Right? Titpalel is you shall pray. Fine. Rashi is addressing, wait a minute, I understand why in the binyan hitpael or nitpael, there is a taf prefix plus another letter before that taf. So you're adding a 2-letter prefix, and then of course you have the suffix indicating who it was. But you just said mitztamek, and the mitztamek, I see the shoresh is sadi mem hu. So mekim, sadi mem hu. But when I look at the word mitztamek here in the first line of the Gemara, I see a tet in there. So you're telling me this is a hitpael. One, if it was hitpael, it should be mit samek, right? It should be mem tov, sadi mem kuf, mit samek. So where'd the tov go? And why is this tet in the middle of the word? So Rashi's telling you that, we'll continue, if you have a root that begins with tzadi, and it's mitpaelet, that means it's in binyan mitpael, or hitpael, then you take the tet and you put it after the tzadi. Yeah, but where'd the tuf go? So Rashi says this on the Torah. Really, the tuf is part of the prefix, and the tuf actually, the way your mouth goes, really there's a difference between tuf and tet. They're different sounds. They're related, but they're not the same. And in older languages, there was actually a distinction. Nowadays, our modern languages don't make such a distinction. Just using a T for all these sounds. You think about it in English, you make a lot of different sounds with the T, especially we Americans, when you say as the opposite former is ladder. And I spelled that with 2 T's, and I pronounce it exactly as I do the word ladder, which is a sulam, L-A-D-D-R. It's pronounced exactly as L-A-T-T-R. And if you look at my mouth, when I say ladder, I'm not doing with my mouth the same thing I do when I say, let's say, T or tree. Even when I say tree, what's that? It's like a CH sound. So these distinctions existed back in the olden days. And Rashi's telling you that when you have a shoresh beginning with shin, samich, or sin, which are pronounced by just putting the teeth together towards the front of the mouth, samich and sin, which are basically the same already in biblical times, and shin is just a different variation of that sin. So that goes with the taf. The taf follows them. You, instead of saying yit or yith shabach, you say yish tabach. And to make order of something, you say lisader, and you put yourself in order, you're mishader, like the samich. So the taf follows. If you said a samich properly, your mouth is in a position to say a taf properly. So if you want to know if you're saying a taf sound, if you say mis properly, then you follow through with mishader or yish tabach. That is a proper taf. But if you were saying your tzadi properly, the way it used to be pronounced, and like it is still in, let's say, Arabic, then you don't have your mouth in position to say a proper taf after the tzadi. How would you pronounce the tzadi properly? It would be lehis tameg. Okay, lehis, not lehis like with the samich, but lehis with a tzadi. You have to put your tongue in a slightly different position toward the back of the mouth. It's called a pharyngealized S or an intensified S. It's related to the samich. It's different. In a lot of languages, if you would have a person speaking normal English, and instead of pronouncing his samich like a samich or a sin, he would say this tamik. So you think he has some sort of lisp, right? That doesn't exist in English, but really that's the proper sound that a savi should make. And once you have your mouth in that position to then say a tough sound, it doesn't sound natural. So you do just like the savi is a variation on the samich, the tet is a variation on the tet. And so too with Zion. Zion and samich are essentially the same letter on the mouth, except the Zion uses the vocal cords also. It's called voiced. That's the difference between bet and pay, and vet and fey, and samich and Zion, like I just said, are tough and dollar. So because a Zion is basically a voiced Samech, when you have a Shorish like Zman, and you're making a hit pa'el out of it, instead of following with a Taf, you follow with a Dalid, with his Da main. Because once your mouth is being voiced, it's for example, this applies in English whenever you have a pluralization. How do you pronounce an S at the end of a word in English to pluralize? If the consonant at the end of that word is voiced, then the S will sound like a Z. And if the consonant is not voiced, then the S remains an S. So in the word pot, the plural of pot in English, pot ends with an unvoiced consonant, a T. So it's pots. I pronounce it like an S. But if I say the word pod, pod ends in a D, which is a voiced sound. So the plural pod is pods, not pods. So, somehow or other. And German, it's always with a Z sound. So that's the rule. And if you have a word in English that ends in a vowel, and vowels are always voiced, then also the S will be pronounced like a Z with the voice of the vowel. So the plural of shoes is shoes, not like shoes. Who says shoes? I think Paulie Shore and the second President Bush talked that way, and it made them sound less intelligent. So that's what they do. So that's what Rashi's saying over here. Rashi's explaining you why it is that there's a tzadi in this, followed by a tet, and no taf before the tzadi in this word. So it's good we learn Rashi. Thank you, Rashi. So he says that you could derive from this teaching that mitztamek v'yafalo mutter, there are ways to put, let's say, your cholent on the blech before Shabbos. And even though we are going to find ways to do this, yes, it's not going to be allowed. This is going to be challenged by the Gemara a few times. Shiny hacha, no, maybe this doesn't teach you that you could put, let's say, a cholent on the kiro before Shabbos. Why? The kitama. Yeah, because he blessed it. He sprinkled it, but it's not a straight up permissibility for us to put cholent directly on, let's say, a kira before Shabbos. Kitama and v'huvara. Remember, our case was he blessed it, he sprinkled on the ashes, but wind came and flared up, but he can still put a cholent on there. Yeah, well, because he did bless it originally. The Gemara says, "Ihaki by lamemra." So what are these Amoraim teaching us? I could have learned this, let's say, from earlier teachings, which said basically that if you sprinkle the ashes on the coals of the kira before Shabbos, so shehiyah is mutter even for something that's mitztamek v'yafaleh. Why? What are you teaching us, Amoraim? And the answer is huvara itztur chalei, because this added a point that the coals flared up on their own. Normally you blacked it, so you don't come to make the coals flare up. But if there's been a major flare up, maybe you have to, I don't know, before you do shehiyah, sprinkle more ashes on it, or do grifa, sweep out those coals because you see that something is making them flare up. Flare ups are a problem. Ma'udetema, you would have said, kevan dehuvara hadra la lemilta kamaita. Because there's a flare up, it's gone back to the original situation before you even blessed it. So either no shehiyah or blech it again, try to do something else. As long as the flare up is happening, you're stuck. Okay, so that's so far this proof is inconclusive. I wrote that the havamina of the flare makes it forbidden for him to leave food on the stove. That was the havamina. The kamash malan is, even though there's been a flare up, he didn't do it. So his original act of sweeping out the coals, or I guess covering the coals, has not been ruined. Okay, that's actually quite a good finish. Yeah. Really? Okay. You're the boss man. But we could read another one if you want. Okay. This Shabbos is Parshas Bamidbar. We have to say something about the Parsha. Okay. So you know that the Rambam says that the Machane is what gives Kedushas HaMikdash. Rabbi Nafkamina. This commandment, once they put up the Mishkan, they were specifically commanded in camp where you did. Originally, they did camp. All the tribes are separate. Each tribe had its own place where it camped. Judah on the east with Yisachar and Zebulun, etc. But now God made it official, and that's what gives it the Machane. When the Machane is as it is supposed to be, it's called Machane Yisrael. It has a din. All of Yerushalayim, that's where you can be Kachim, and Machane Levi accounts, and there's Machane Shilo, that's the Azar of the Beis HaMikdash. Nafkamina was when they crossed over the Yarden, they got to Gilgal, and they stayed there for 14 years and kept the Mishkan there. There was a heter bamos because the machane didn't exist. Hisul machanos meant that all bets were off. Suddenly, there's less of a din of mikdash. Why? Because once all Am Yisrael is in its place, then the kedusha could happen. So too, if everybody would come back to Eretz Yisrael, we'd be able to have things like Shmita and Yovel once again. Once everybody's in their place, the mitzvahs count. Have a good Shabbos. Be well. See you all on Sunday.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.